Okay, so hello, welcome everybody. It's February somehow. The year is flying by. And today we're just going to take some time to not focus on one component of experiential and community-based learning, but really just to chat and see if you have any questions for Jeff and Shana who joined us today. They do some form of experiential and community-based learning, which they'll share about. And if no matter where you are in the process, whether you've done it a lot or you haven't really done much of community-based learning, please, this is your time to ask them questions and see where they're at. I would love to start though with introductions. For everybody, we'll start with kind of the participants and then we'll do the speakers. So I'll start off because Tina, I know we just met today, but I am the experiential and community-based learning coordinator in career services, and I'm here to support faculty, staff, and students and make connections to community partners for things within the ECBL realm. And we'll do popcorn. So I will have Tina go next.
Hi, my name is Tina LeBaron. I am the program director for the early childhood program. I am in the technology and consumer science department. So it's the hodgepodge of programs all in one. Cisco, early childhood, family life, engineering, everything. And I'm just here to listen and get some ideas. I will go Karen.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm just here to learn about this process more. And I'm in the psychology department, and I have to leave a little early because I have a class at 12. So I like to be there early for my class. So when I cut out, that's why I'm leaving. But that's about it.
Christine, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Christine Jones, and I'm English faculty. And I'm also the OER coordinator, which is Open Educational Resources. And I'm interested in connecting some of my courses to community-based learning.
Perfect. So now I'm going to ask Shana, if you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit, about what you're doing in community-based learning, and then we'll have time to ask questions. And then towards the end, I can also share how I can support everyone as well. So we'll have Shana go first. You don't have a time limit or anything, and then Jeff will have you go second.
I'm Shana, and I'm in psychology, and I'm the program director for the Developmental Disabilities Specialist Certificate Program. And there are two classes that come under the umbrella of experiential and community-based learning. The first is Psych 243, which is Psychology of Developmental Disabilities. For that class, I require my students to spend 5 hours volunteering where they're directly interacting with people with developmental disabilities, and I set up their choices for where they volunteer. So I partner with local organizations, and since COVID, I have had both online and in-person options. And so I offer like a catalog of choices for the students, and they sign up within the first week of where they're going to do their 5 hours. The ones that are doing online do 1 hour a week, and then the ones who do in person much more often go for 1 5-hour day. And then there's an assignment that is linked to those 5 hours, as well as like a signed log sheet by somebody who works at the organization. And I find that it's really helpful because we're learning out of a textbook and from my lectures with stories and maybe some videos about people with disabilities, but it definitely has a bigger impact when they get to just hang out with people with disabilities and realize they're just people. And so that has been the emphasis for that community-based learning or experiential learning experience. And then the other class is for my certificate program. There is an internship course that it's 80 hours of working directly as a service provider for people with developmental disabilities. And the vast majority of the students taking that have a paid position. They're using their job as their internship. And many of them work more than the 80 hours. And so they just count about 8 to 10 hours a week of however many total that they are working. And yeah, so that's the other class that I teach that I think is relevant to this conversation. So at whatever point you want to ask questions about either of those classes, I'm happy to answer questions, how I found organizations and, all the things. So.
Thank you, Shana. That's a good start, because I think once we hear Jeff and how, there might be some intersections, and then the questions can flow from there. Jeff, you want to go ahead and share your interaction with ECBL?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. My apologies in advance for any issues with the connection on my end. I'm on campus, but there's just not enough Wi-Fi to go around today, it looks like. That's why you see me moving it to different parts of my desk. I'm trying to find the sweet spot where it's not stuttering. So I have to tell you first, just on the front end here, it's really interesting to me that I've never met Shana before, but that our approach to this is so similar. And I think that there's something to that. So just background, I've not done this in my English comp or creative writing classes, but we use community-based learning in the honors program. The honors program serves quite a few GCC students. We're right around 600 right now. And the vast majority of these are what's called President's Honors Scholars, right? So they join us in their first semester at GCC. Their eligibility is to turn honors class. There's a lot of other requirements that they have to fulfill to be eligible to renew the scholarship. It's really great, though. It takes care of all of their tuition. But anyway, one of the requirements is that they complete 4 hours of volunteering, right? And so similar to what Shana does, yeah, thanks for that, Lindsay. Similar to what Shana does, we have a repository of volunteer choices that my co-director, Mike Strong, and we curate those. And that was one of the first things that we changed when we started running the program, was that historically students were allowed to volunteer at different places, and then they would just kind of submit the volunteering. But now we require there to be approved providers, and we work to curate not just choices that are approved by the college in terms of the insurance piece, but also choices that really make sense in terms of their learning experience and the potential for connections to FOIs and honors program outcome goals and things like that. Now, that said, we've got like over 25 different approved. Again, like Shana, we have virtual and in-person options. We first started doing this during COVID, and so we knew there was going to have to be virtual options because the students are required to do it for the scholarship. I was really anxious about that piece, but honestly, we've identified there's a lot of, you'd be surprised how many, virtual community-based learning options there are out there, if that's something that you have a need for in your class. Again, this is really funny, again, similar to Shana, there's a component where they have to get a says, yes, you volunteered these 4 hours. There's a reflection that they write up that's driven by, a short quiz with 5 or 6 prompts, and they respond to that, they write it up, and they submit it to us where they reflect on the volunteer work that they've done. We also this semester started using another quiz in Canvas where they can kind of like rate their satisfaction with the provider, so that we can share those ratings with other students, so that helps them make choices about where they want to volunteer. Another thing that we're doing is we're trying to kind of group the volunteer options into things that may interest students based on not even just their FOI, but their interest in their broader kind of educational and life goals examples. I'll try to pull that up so you can see what that looks like while people are thinking if they have any questions, I guess. I think that's about all I got till I pull this up here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think it's really, really great to hear just how ECBL fits into different programming, different groups, different courses, things like that. So we'll stop, take a pause since they've introduced themselves. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask Jeff and Shana? And if not, I have some questions that I can also ask. Don't be shy.
I just want to say, Jeff, talk, because you want to add some of the disability sites to your list. I'm sure that they would appreciate, because I'm a very small program. I'm sending a handful of students per semester. If you have hundreds, then yeah, and then maybe they want to come take my certificate because they like their 4 hours. So
Yeah,
we
if
should
you could,
talk.
yeah, we should. If you could send me their contact info, that would be amazing. You are absolutely right, because we have Special Olympics right now, and I've
So
got
much more.
yeah, of course, yeah, we would love to add that. That would be wonderful.
Great. Yes, questions, go for it.
This is exactly like what I want to see, even though the two of you are connecting as speakers. My goal in the future is to have a group, whether it needs, one time a year or twice a year, just to say, hey, I'm doing experiential learning. What are you doing? Things like that, where it just feels like you're supported from all sides. So this is really encouraging.
Yeah,
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. All that I was going to say is that I think that, and it's kind of funny, it's similar to teaching English comp, where, if you just let students write about whatever the heck they want, you're generally going to get the quality is not going to be as good as if you either assign a topic or you have a focused list of choices. And I think this is real similar to that. So like, I'll just share with you, because you all are welcome to look at this. I'll share with you our partner list, and you can see it's sort of organized based on different interests. They review the list, and then there is the link available for them to volunteer with the provider. Now, of course, one thing that, it always makes me kind of nervous is that I don't talk to every single provider every semester. So I'm always worried, that there's going to be some kind of speed bump and that there's going to be some kind of problem for the students. But the thing that you got to remember is that these organizations, they need this. This is how they survive. And so they generally want to make things pretty easy for people to volunteer. If you've got a setup with them that works, they're generally pretty willing to sign a form or drop an email to you about people's participation. I think, in some disciplines, then maybe there would be a situation where the instructor would say, look, we're all going to go to the same place. I think that's fine. Or it could be, hey, here's a list of different places and different ways you could do this.
One thing that's unique about the honors program too with volunteering is Jeff will also let his students choose. Like if there's something that's not on the list, but they have an interest, then he'll just say, hey, can you check on the approval for this community partner? And if they're not approved, then we can work on getting them approved. So for everyone on the call, if you eventually do an experiential and community-based learning project and you have an organization in mind, and you check with me and they're not on the approved list, that doesn't mean they're off limits. That just means we have to get their approval, their paperwork. So I have a question for you all. It sounds like, I don't know how long you've each been doing your role and the CBL the way it's been done, but can you think back to the beginning and just talk about some of maybe the bumps along the way and how you overcame those and what resources you utilize to kind of move forward?
Well, I did a version of the class that I teach at a previous institution, and I started doing the assignment in that version of the course in another city and state. And it's just a lot of cold calls and cold emails to organizations that I found. I started by reaching out to people that I knew that knew the community better than I did, and said, what organizations would you suggest that I contact? So I could start with some where I was using a name of like, oh, this person referred me to you. But then I was so successful with that because people were so happy to say, oh, here, would you like some volunteers? That it sort of emboldened me to then, contact ones that I just Googled and found. And people were really pretty happy to hear from me. For my population that I'm focused on, I do have to be very clear that because the number of hours that I'm requiring is so small, that I cannot require that my students first get fingerprint, background check, clearance cards, like all these things that take more than the hours of the assignment. And also that cost money. And so that does limit. There are some things I can't do. And so I have to make sure that I'm finding things where they're never alone with the clients and things like that. But I haven't really had a problem with that because there were enough options that are okay with that. But it's something to keep in mind, that there are some groups that if you're going to volunteer, you have to really invest some time in getting through some hurdles before they let you in the door. And so that would be a longer commitment if you were going to have a class do that. I use a website called signup.com, and that's where I put all of the opportunities. At my previous institution, I had probably 200 students a semester that were choosing their sites, and they were doing 10 hours instead of the 5 that I do here. And so just to keep it all straight, but it was very confusing to the students because they thought that the organizations could see that website, but I was the only one who could see that website. I was using it to keep all of the students straight. And so I make it very clear, I'm using this to know which student is where. And then I'm going to give you contact information for the organization, and you have to reach out to them and explain who you are and what exact dates you signed up for, because they can't see the website. And that continues to be confusing to the students, mostly because they don't read instructions where I explain all these things quite clearly. But somehow it all gets done. So I would say that's a caveat. That they don't think about all the organizational piece, especially when it gets large. When I was at the previous organization, I could have them do a fingerprint and clearance kind of thing because it was in an education program. So Tina, this is relevant for you. And so they had to have proof of that documentation before they went out for their volunteer hours. So I had to be able to check all of that. So there were many spreadsheets with other people putting in information and then me checking it involved. So yeah, I think that keeping some of that stuff in mind, and the paperwork that any kind of site that's receiving the volunteers might need to have, because even if it's not a vulnerable population, I think that most organizations would like to have at least a simple demographic sheet filled out of who was here, so that if something really weird happens, that they have something that says who this person was that was here on that day. If something goes down, other sites will say, we just need to make a copy of your driver's license when you get here. But they usually just want something to document who was this person who was in our space. So just letting students know that ahead of time. So that's some of the documentation and organizational pieces that might be helpful. And it can sound overwhelming, but when I found the signup.com site, that was like, oh, if I can use this, I don't have to create anything out of like Google Docs. This is so much easier. The site sends them reminders, I think 2 days before their signed up date. So there are tools out there that are free that you can use to help you with some of these things.
Okay, I something I can tell you about when we first, when Mike and I first took over the program, is we had to think about learning by volunteering. And I think if you're going to have a community-based learning component in a class, you want to think about what do you want this to look like for students? Is this here because it's sort of an internship kind of piece so they can get experience, unpaid experience in the field, and you're going to use your expertise to like link them with providers that are a good place to do that? Is it going to be that? Or is it going to be volunteering in terms of like community service, like something that benefits the community? Because I can tell you when Mike and I took over, I mean, there were none that were pre-approved, and there was kind of like a suggested list. And some of them were more like internships. It was basically like, oh, you can come to this PCP's office, this primary care doctor's office, and work for free, basically for 4 hours. And, some of the students who were interested in nursing, had taken advantage of that opportunity in the past, and they had good experiences. But, Mike and I and the honors advisory committee, we kind of sat down and we're like, well, okay, well, like, is this really serving the community though? I mean, abstractly, sure, primary care offices, yes, they serve the community, but it's not really, go bank and packing, packages from home, which serves our veterans, right? Neither is better or worse. It's just very different. And so, and maybe you've already thought about that. Maybe you already have a good idea of what that's back to that piece where, I think that they like having some choice and some control over what their experience looks like, but then we need some guardrails about like kind of what things you suggest. And then, you're gonna want to create the form that they have to sign. You're probably not going to want to rely on the provider to do that. I think that I don't know that the reflection piece is required, but I mean, I think that it seems to me that most folks that do some kind of community-based learning, there's an assignment that grows out of it. Like one of our faculty members did like a really cool, they had students do a podcast with refugees. We've had other faculty where the students will do like presentations. So, generally there's some kind of assignment associated with this so that they can kind of think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And a lot of the providers, especially like the food banks, when they orient you, they want people to come back and volunteer more. And so they're really encouraging that reflection. They're helping the participants that are there, not just students, right? They're helping all the participants kind of understand the value and the importance of their volunteers, like to the mission of the group. And so, it's sort of baked in, I think, to some degree to the volunteering process, but generally, if you have some kind of assignment, then that really elucidates kind of the benefits of it, the students being able to think about the benefits of it. But, I think the length and breadth of that obviously could really vary depending on the discipline and what you wanted to do with it, really.
Yeah, I agree. I have an assignment where they can choose the modality. So they can choose to write a paper, or they could make a video, or they can do like a brochure kind of visual thing. And so there's lots of choices in how they do it. And very few of the questions in that assignment have wrong answers. It's a lot of just what did you do while you were there and how did you feel about it? But I do require that they link it to content within the class. And so I think that that's, the focus of mine. But I have known of other instructors that have much longer engagement with the community site, so that, Jeff and I have very short one-off kind of experiences, but there are classes that have many, many, many hours stretched out, multiple visits across the semester. And truly, when you look at the research on community-based learning, it's usually from a philosophy of going to that site and saying, what do you need? As opposed to me crafting what I want my students to get out of it and then telling the site, I want them to get this, I want them to do this. Because I have sites that would love it if my students would come and just do like, collating and paperwork and cleaning and in the back room. And I say, no, their entire time has to be in direct interaction with people with disabilities, because I'm trying to get the point across that they're people and not other. And that's my focus. And so I have had to tell sites, I can't have them doing this other stuff that's office work, even though you need someone to help you with office work. I have to go with my learning objective, but that makes it not as much community-based learning. Maybe it's more experiential, but there are other instructors that go and say, we'll give you 20 hours across the semester, and we'll come every week for this many weeks or whatever. But we don't even know what the project is until we get there, because we're going to ask you what the project should be. And that's a different philosophical approach to it, but they both, fall under the umbrella of ECBL.
Thank you all for that. Anyone have a question? Because that's a lot of great information. I don't know where Karen and Christine and Tina, where you're at in the process. And obviously you're coming into a conversation that's been going for a while. So if there's any questions too about, just the fundamentals, we can certainly talk about those. But do you have any questions for them just in the place you are, and maybe asking them like, how did you navigate this, or what support did you find for this?
So I'm going to keep my camera off because every time I turn it on, there's a huge lag. And again, I'm on campus, so I'm not sure if there's just not enough Wi-Fi to go around or what have you. But I do have a few questions. We do have 3 courses that we have in our program that has an internship or field experience component to it. However, as I hear both Shana and Jeff speak, it's opening like floodgates of other classes that I can see, a community-based learning project could work in this course. So what was that process like? How difficult is it to kind of embed it in there? Are there any extra steps or permissions that one would need to go through in order to offer 3 choices? Because there's, in most of the time, every year, there are 3, besides COVID times, there are 3 events that kind of happen at the same time. And so it would be really great to say, you can choose out of one of the 3 events, and then give them an event to choose. And then, to create a podcast or to create a flyer about the content that they learned from that event. I don't know, it's something I can see it kind of swirling around in my head how I would want to do it. But it's really great, as Jeff was talking, the difference between a community-based learning event or a community-based learning kind of assignment opposed to an internship. So that kind of, I was like, there's the connection that I needed. So I don't know if either one of you would mind sharing about like maybe your process and how you started to implement it or what that looks like. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the class existed and was taught by someone else before I came in and then made it to have this assignment. And so it did get, a note in Find a Class that does note that, but who knows if they read that. But I really have to work hard to find options for every possible work schedule. And that is a challenge. And so, I have a lot of options that are kind of typical office or school hours of Monday through Friday, typical workday hours. And it's much harder for me to find evening and weekend hours, but I'll have at least one so that if somebody says I can't do anything Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. because I work, then I have to have something on the weekend. And so if I'm saying you have one choice, you have to do this one on the weekend. But I'd like to have more than that, but That's what I currently have, but it's a small class. So it has been working out to do that. But that's something to keep in mind, that if students are not expecting this to be a class that has field hours, because they know from the title of X, Y, and Z class that those are internship or fieldwork hours classes, and this is just a class, and then you spring it on them, then you have to have that flexibility available. And so if those 3 events all happen to be on Saturdays and someone is like, I work Saturdays, then you've got an issue. So you want to really think ahead about those things. Yeah, Jeff, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really smart point, because, with the honors program, they know that they're required to do volunteering, to receive and renew the President's Honor Scholarship. And that's a district-wide requirement. And because there's so many different choices and there's virtual ones, we've never had, any issues with people's work schedules. But as Shana was talking about that, I thought, yeah, I worked all through undergrad and graduate school, and I think she's right to be sensitive to that, because if I was taking, a course and I showed up on the first day and all of a sudden they're telling me that there's all these other hours beyond the class hours that I have to be able to do this, I mean, I would want to know on the front end, and I'd want there to be lots of options, so that it would fit my schedule, especially if it's not something that's generally considered in it's not implied by the description of the course.
Yeah,
So on that, oh, sorry. Shana made a comment that there was a note in Find a Class. Is there a process to get that completed, or is that just something that you would do on the next, when you're doing your schedule for the next semester, or is it just like a go forward thing? And I'm not sure if that's a question that any of you can answer. Just don't know if there's additional paperwork on my end that I would need to do or complete in order to have a community-based learning assignment embedded in one of my courses.
Yeah, that's a great question about the note. I don't know how to get those in there because I don't add notes, but certainly if it was me, I'd want to have something in the syllabus, and then it could be, I'd have something about it in the syllabus quiz too. But then of course, to your point about the class note, at that point, they've already enrolled. And so that's the benefit to having kind of a heads up about that available ahead of time.
Does anyone know how to do that, or is that a question that I could research?
It should be during textbook acquisition. That is where the notes tend to be. Check with your department secretary when you are filling out the form for requesting the textbook for that semester.
Yeah, I think that the administrative person for my department is who got that noted on there when they were putting up the classes for the next semester. I also thought of something else that I did at my previous institution, because it was 10 hours instead of 5, so that they were always going for at least more than one day. And that was that I did a whole little kind of module tutorial with a quiz on professionalism, specifically dress. And so I had pictures of appropriate clothes and inappropriate clothes, and then they had to be able to identify which were the appropriate. And I went by all the different pieces of clothing. So it was tops and bottoms and shoes and all of the things, and basically recommended that they wear kind of a golf shirt collared kind of t-shirt, and then khaki pants and some form of closed-toed shoes. I have some of my students go to adaptive sports that have been adapted for different disabilities. And so then they are allowed to wear slightly more exercise type of clothes, but no logos, no images on their clothes, really just plain solid color things, and definitely having to have closed-toed shoes, because if you have ever had an electronic wheelchair roll over your foot, that means that they've, shattered the bones in that foot. So let's try to avoid that. But I found that yeah, I didn't want to assume that they knew how to present themselves. So I did more of a push of like, you are representing me, you are representing our university, like you need to be the face of us. And so we have an expectation of how you will present yourself out in the community. So I think that knowing your population of students and whether they need that spiel and a quiz to go along with that spiel, I felt that that was important. At my previous institution, I feel like because it's shorter hours, that I have not had any issues with that. I have had some students who, similar to what they do in our classes, they just start no showing and kind of disappear. And that meant that I lost a site because they felt that that was unprofessional and they didn't want to host a volunteer the next semester because they didn't feel they could count on my students to finish their time. And this was, again, 5 hours. They were going to do 2.5, and they went the first day and then they just like never showed up again. And so that can be an issue. And so to try to prevent that is something that perhaps our committee could create a module on that kind of professionalism, but it does vary as far as where you're going. I'm never sending anybody in a suit. I'm never sending anyone to an appropriate setting for that. It's always very like, you need to be able to move and run around and chase kids and have fun and maybe do some painting and get messy. So it needs to be washable clothing, not dry clean, but I want you to look a little nicer than maybe how you show up to my class in your flip-flops and your low cut and your, like all of those things. So that's something else. Again, I think, Tina, we have so much overlap in the kind of settings and the kind of needs that we're looking at, that's something to consider as well.
On that note, Sheena, so Sheena recently got approved for her own dynamic forms folder, which it's super easy to do. But on that note, Tina, there's paperwork for the students, not super difficult, and then there's paperwork for the community partners, which I can help with both and or. But one resource that we have here at GCC is that our IT department's really helpful with getting any faculty set up in dynamic forms. And so then you can just have students fill out the paperwork digitally. And Shana, do you want to share that? I don't know how much you want to share, but just the process of getting signed up and how it's been helpful for you. Because before it was kind of routing through me, and now it's just straight to Shana. Do you also send out the packet with the code of conduct in it? Because we do have okay, go ahead. I'd love to hear your take on that.
So originally I would give out paper forms and get them signed and in class in person before COVID. And then I would scan them and I would need to send the scans to Lindsay's office with Lindsay's predecessor. And then we moved to the students could upload, their scanned form. And then I could share that. And then it became the students filling it out online, but I couldn't see that they had filled it out. So we had a shared spreadsheet where Lindsay would check periodically if they had filled it out. And then when I saw that Lindsay had checked them off, then I could give them their points, because everything is assigned points. They get a point for filling out the forms, that kind of thing. And so now I can go in and look at whether they have, I actually get an email if they filled out the forms, and I don't have to go through Lindsay anymore. And it was very easy to do this semester for the first time. I just get an email when a student has completed the packet, and then I go in. So yeah, it's much easier in cutting out the middleman. And then we know that we've got just that kind of basic liability waiver coverage all in one. They originally were going to have them filling out 3 separate things, but then this semester they bundled it so that the student just fills out one packet of forms. And so it's getting simpler and simpler each semester. So I highly recommend working with the dynamic forms folks.
And Jeff, can you talk a little bit too? Because I know, Tina, you've been here a while, but you're taking over the program. Jeff, can you recommend as far as resources and support you've gotten from career services and what you kind of feel is easier to do on your own? Is that something you can share with Tina?
Yeah, sure. I think those are smart things to think about at the outset. right? Because, certainly the career services folks have been amazing. And they're going to be so helpful to you in whatever you want to set up with this. You just have to think about, what do you want to be responsible for, and what do you want, them to help with and support you in. So like, for example, whenever if we have a student that's interested in a provider, if we're interested in a provider and it's not on the list, Lindsay will reach out to them for us. And that's really helpful, having her do that piece with the legwork. And then she also lets us know about upcoming other approved providers that are doing like one-off events that I wouldn't know about. Like, I like to try to be dialed into other things happening at the college level, but she's on email lists, I'm not. And so she tells me about these, and I say, great, awesome. And then I'll promote it to the students. However, back when we first started working with career services, we were trying to figure out, like, how we were going to track student volunteer hours. And we decided to maintain control of that at our level, just because we knew there was going to be issues. There were going to be students who didn't complete the hours. We knew there were students who didn't do enough hours. And so, after lots of conversations with Lindsay and the career services folks, we figured, okay, career services is going to house the college-wide repository of approved providers. They're going to help us identify new ones. They're going to help us add ones to the list. We're going to work closely with them on that. But then in terms of, we call them proofs, right? In terms of the student submissions of the volunteering, we handle all that. Obviously, the reflections we handle. And so I think, what that partnership looks like probably, varies from department to department, because the career services folks have seemed really like flexible to me. They were never like, oh, this is how you have to do it this way. And so I would encourage you to just, like, if you have questions about setting this up, like, ask them, and they'll kind of like work through it with you in a way that like really makes sense, as opposed to like, oh, this is the bureaucratic way that we do it, even if it doesn't make sense. It's really quite refreshing. They want to see your students have a good experience, and they're willing to kind of figure out like how they can create something unique for your class. So I would really encourage you to kind of leverage that. But like that said, though, I would also say that the first time you do it, and Shana can correct me if I'm wrong here, the first time you do something like this, there's just going to be a lot of unknowns. And if you're like me, you're going to have a lot of anxieties about it, because you want to be sure the students have a good experience. You want to be sure it goes well. And that's the other plus, is that, career services, they've done this before. They've done this with other classes. They can connect you to other instructors that have done it. So you can get as many of those anxieties ticked off beforehand as you can. But then, at the end of the day, you just do it. You do it, and it's going to turn out, better than you thought it would. And a lot of the things that you were worried about, those aren't going to end up being the things that are the problems. It's something else, and you'll deal with it, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think just any information, I think, for just the process is helpful, because people are coming in at different timelines, starting and finishing. And, like Shana, you picked up a class that was already created and kind of going from there. So we have 10 minutes left. I wanted to ask if Christine or Tina, if you had any more questions, and then I was just going to give like a little spiel of how career services can support with specifics. Because I think I like how Jeff put it. We really want you to have the fun part and the creative part, and just helping you get your programs to be well-oiled machines, where you're not every year stressed about like, oh my gosh, I have to set this up. We'll help you get it so it's smooth and fluid. But any last questions for our speakers? Thank you all so much for coming, by the way.
I don't have any questions for the speakers at this time. Lindsay, I would love to touch base with you. As we do so many events, we have the Children's Center over here, and we do a lot of community events. And so I would love to touch base with you and just kind of pick your brain. And then I know it sounds like semantics, but I also have a lot of terms that I'm familiar with and that we use, like we use service learning projects, but then this is community-based learning. And so I just want to make sure that I'm not misusing terms that I've become so familiar with, and that they haven't just changed or reworked itself
Yeah.
through the college, and I'm using terms that are no longer
I
relevant.
think that's a really important question because I think semantics really define what we're talking about, right? And it's just nuanced. I think any experiential and community-based learning is amazing. It's just like, what name do you want to put to that type, right? So certainly I can go over those definitions. And I wanted to share a couple other things. Christine, did you have anything? I saw your camera come up. No, okay. So here in career services, we are here to help you with anything from connecting you to the dynamic forms process so that you can get the paperwork directly into an electronic folder. We can help approve community partners, whether that's just letting you know if they're approved or if they're not approved, I can reach out and actually get their paperwork done and sent to district. We've also, due to Shana's idea, we created an internship faculty group, which Tina, I'm not sure if you were on that first meeting. It's very low commitment. I think we plan to meet twice a year, Shana, once at the beginning, once at the end of the academic year, just to check in. And it's a group that can just support other people doing internships and what went well, what didn't go well, things like that. We have an ECBL committee on campus that is really hoping to champion the work of ECBL because I do think it's growing. I think there's kind of a movement and an understanding of how impactful it can be. And one of those things includes a website for the intranet so that faculty can, like you said, Tina, how do we define internships? How do we define service learning? You can go to the internet, you can click on the different types of ECBL that we offer and get that information. And how do I get started? Things like that. So it's currently being built. We're hoping by the end of this term, by the summer, it can be actually utilized. One thing I wanted to mention too is that we also are creating an assessment, which we want to be used for whoever. It's not going to be mandated, but it's a way for our campus community to have centralized data on ECBL. So let's say, Jeff's doing volunteer work with his honor students, Shana's doing volunteer and internships. You can provide this assessment. We want it to be short. We want it to be, really just provide the information that we ultimately want. And then all that information can go into a report where we can actually see all the different teachers, including CBL, into their coursework and see what kind of impact. And over time, we'll get to see, like, is ECBL connected to retention, right? Is it helping our students stay motivated in their degrees, things like that. So that's coming. And then just a little pro tip. I work with students, Tina, that just come to me via, cranium meetings. They just want to meet and talk about internships for their own. I work with faculty who have courses like Jeff with his honors and Shana and other instructors that actually have a 4-credit course. And I get the question a lot, Shana, you brought this up. How I have a student that is in a degree program that requires a fingerprint card, but that's a money issue. What can I do? I always like to share with students the emergency funding, and I'm not sure if you've gotten the email recently, but it's kind of first come, first serve, and it's $200 that can go to the students for school type things. It does go away usually by the end of the term because it's all used, but that's one area where I do like to have students fill that out. And I think fingerprint cards are around $70 right now. So that will help with a good chunk of that. I know we have 5 minutes left, so I would be happy, Tina, to meet with you and really anyone, whatever part of the process you're in. We use the acronym. Sorry, there's a lot of talking and things going on in the background. We use the acronym PARES. So PARES, just as like a way to help with the process of ECBL. So P is planning. P is a really big step. This could take a year. This could take more. Just figuring out what you want to do, how you want to do it, how you're going to put in your syllabus, creating community partners. But then when you get to A, R, E, S, A is action. So that's actually doing it, right? Whether that's having students sign up and then they do the hours. R is for reflection, which Jeff, you mentioned, you don't know if it's required. It really isn't, but it's probably one of the most important pieces to really draw it all in. So we highly promote it. We highly encourage it. We're never going to mandate anything because that's not our job. That's that's someone else's job. So E is for evaluation, and that's kind of the assessment piece. There's reflection is different from assessment, and I think Shana, you mentioned this. There's no wrong answers for a reflection. This is just getting feedback. How did it go for you? What did you learn? Assessment is more. It could be a Likert scale assessment of did you learn what you were set out to learn, right? Enter your learning objective. Did you actually get there? Not at all. Yes, whatever. And then the S is for sharing, and sharing is a piece that I really want to perform more on campus too. And that's kind of what we're doing here, sharing out with faculty, saying, I did this type of ECBL project with my students this year, and here's how it went. Or we just did it and it was kind of rough and rocky, but we're excited to reiterate it again and make some improvements. So just sharing with the campus, I think there's so much more that I have no clue that's going on, just because we haven't connected, but to serve as a way to encourage other faculty that are putting time and energy because they believe in it. They think it's important. So with that, that's all I have for you all today. I really appreciate it. I know it's a small group, but this recording will go out to the people that couldn't make it today, and it'll just, it'll be available for anyone that has questions. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope that, the rest of before spring break goes smoothly. Reach out if you have any questions. And then Christine, I'll see you next month for our next meeting. Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.